want you to turn to Matthew chapter 12. We're going to pick up where we left off, Saturday before last. And we're dealing with Matthew chapter 12, verse 1 through 8, which is the first story on the Sabbath day that's given to us in this particular chapter. And then there's a second story that begins in verse 19. And we've been dealing with the three options that Jesus gives to the Pharisees in regard to the Sabbath day law and the situation that's come up with the disciples. And he gives them three situations. We're dealing with the last one, which is found, of course, in verse 7. So Matthew chapter 12, verse 7 is really our passage. And this got so big as I got into it, and especially got into the context of the whole thing, that we're going to have to break this particular part of it into two sections. So we're dealing with one tonight, and then another Saturday night we will deal with the second part of this. And tonight we want to focus on the context of this and show you something of the flow, that this is not just thrown out there. Jesus isn't just speaking this just as an idea. This isn't the whole flow of Matthew's writings, and particularly Jesus' ministry. So it's very significant, this statement. We've been working on an outline. Of course, you know all of this spills out of chapter 11, which ends in this great invitation. So there is this phenomenal invitation that's given by Jesus, which is an invitation to rest, which sounds good to most of us. But when you begin to understand what the rest is all about, it's not rest is in laziness, which most of us want to be, but it's way beyond that, and it's rest in the fact of linking with Him in such tight linkage that His resource becomes yours, and He elevates you into a new status of function and movement, whereby you are so dependent upon Him, and His unlimited resource is so great that it feels like you're doing nothing when really He's doing everything through you. And the wonder of that concept is just overwhelming. And it's a whole cross-style concept, of course, that we die to ourselves and live out of Him instead of living out of ourselves and what we can do. And as we've repeated time and time again, I've done my best, and that's why I am where I am, because I've done my best. So obviously, something's going to have to happen that's beyond my best for me to get out of where I am. So the call that He's calling us to is into His best and into all that He can do and wants to do in us. So He's inviting us to come to rest. And the invitation, of course, in verse 28 is an invitation to those who labor and are heavy laden. So if you're not worn out, this doesn't have anything to do with you. You just sleep on. If you are totally, absolutely exhausted, if life has literally worn you out, if the problems and the pressures of living have just become so strong you can hardly put one foot in front of another, then this is an invitation to you. And it's an invitation to come and rest. And it's also, it's really hard to get away from, and we've said this many times, but it's such a key to the passage, is that the rest is all contained within His person. And the pronouns, come to me, I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you. Learn of me, for I am gentle and lowly in heart. You will find rest for your souls, for my yoke is easy and my burden. And the emphasis is so strong on focusing on Him, and He is the solution and the answer to the need of the human life. Wow, it's just phenomenal. Now, when He gets done with that tremendous invitation, then Matthew moves us immediately into this chapter 12. And he introduces these two stories. And isn't it interesting? These two stories are about the Sabbath day, which is the day of rest. So the invitation follows, or the stories follow this phenomenal invitation. Now, obviously, what he's doing is he's contrasting the Pharisees' idea of rest over against his idea of rest. See, their idea of rest is, a day off. A vacation. See, their idea is that. Jesus' idea is, what do you need a day off for? Why don't you rest every day? That's a unique concept, isn't it? In fact, as you go into the epistles, and especially in the book of Hebrews, there's this whole concept about rest. Enter into the rest. And it's a status, it's a state of being, it's a, wow, you're to always be in this state. It's just a phenomenal concept. So obviously, in this passage, he's taking these stories, showing you the Pharisees over here, their concept of rest, over against his concept. Now, as you get into this contrast, we've been working through an outline, of course, and the outline is in verse 1 and 2, you have the situation, which is presented to us. And then verse 3 down through verse 7, verse 7, you have the sample, and he breaks that into three ideas where Jesus literally lays out the Old Testament for them. One, of course, is the showbread. The second one is the Sabbath workers in verse 5 and 6. And then the one we want to deal with tonight is verse 7, which is the superior mercy. And then he gives the summary of the whole thing, the sum of it, and gives us this phenomenal principle in verse 8, which wraps it all up. Now, the situation in verse 1 and 2, for those of you who haven't been involved in this, the situation, of course, is very simple. The disciples are walking on the Sabbath day, which probably was breaking the Sabbath day journey law, but whatever. So they're walking through the fields, and they're not just ambling through a grain field. They are on the road, on their way someplace, and the grain is ripe, and it's heavy, and it's hanging over, and they pick and eat, which was quite all right to do. So you could pick and eat, and you weren't stealing. If you took a sickle and went into the field and began to harvest, that would be another deal. But they're just picking and eating, and they're hungry. But then I've noticed you disciples are always hungry because we're always eating, aren't we? So there's no problem with that. So they're hungry. And they pick of this grain, which, of course, was okay, except it was the Sabbath day. And you can't harvest on the Sabbath day. But they've picked the grain, which, of course, is a reaping act. Therefore, they've broken the Sabbath day law one time. Now, they take the grain and they rub it between their hands, which, of course, is thrashing. So they've broken the Sabbath day law 2 times. Oh, then they blow the chaff away, which is winnowing, which you can't do on the Sabbath day. So they've broken the Sabbath day law 3 times. Then they put it in their mouth and eat, which is breaking the law, no doubt, the 4th time, because they probably eat more than they should have on the Sabbath day. It's limited. So there's 4 times, and the Pharisees come and say, look, Jesus, in verse 2, your disciples are doing what is not lawful to do on the Sabbath day. Now you realize that each one of these situations, each thing they did, is punishable by stoning to death. So you can carry stones on the Sabbath day, but you can't pick grain. So you got to keep the rules straight, you know. So here's the situation. Now, Jesus turns to them in verse 3 and begins to give this discourse. And he starts out with the first idea, which is the showbread, and talks about King David, who's an impressive guy. And of course, to the Pharisees, he was the father, the king father of all of Israel. So that he's really an important man in their eyes. So David came with a bunch of young men, and they were hungry because they had been running from Saul. And David has been anointed king, but he hasn't taken over yet. And King Saul is still in charge, and King Saul is trying to kill David. So David is running and hiding with this group of young men. And they've been doing that for 3 days, and they've had nothing to eat, and they're about to starve to death. So they come to this place called Nob, and that's where the tabernacle is. And David slips in to the priest and says, you got anything to eat? And of course, he doesn't have anything for them to eat, except there is the showbread. Now, the showbread was 12 loaves of bread that was baked and put on the altar on the Sabbath day. And it stayed there all week. Then fresh bread was baked, put on the altar, and the old showbread could then be taken and eaten exclusively by the priest. So the priest says, well, all I've got is this old showbread. We've just replaced it with the new, so here's the old. And David took it and ate it with his men. You would expect fire to come down from above, but it didn't. Because evidently God didn't care. That's the whole point. Evidently God didn't care. Well, they broke the law, I know. They aren't supposed to do that, I know. But the point is, as he moves into this, that human life is of more value than your laws. And you're so focused on your law, you've missed the value of the human being. And he's really strong on that. And we talked about that. Then he goes to the second one, which is another example. And we talked about this a couple weeks ago. Verse 5. Or have you not read in the law that on the Sabbath, the priest in the temple profane the Sabbath and are blameless? Why? Because they do all kinds of things, the priests do, on the Sabbath that you can't do. For instance, they slaughter an animal, which you can't do that on the Sabbath day. They lift that animal, which is way beyond the weight that's permissible to lift on the Sabbath day. And they light fires, and you can't do that on the Sabbath day. And there's just all kinds of things the priests do on the Sabbath day that the normal person can't do. But it doesn't matter. I bet the priest does it because they're in service to God, so it's permissible and okay. Then he makes this phenomenal statement. They do this in the temple and in the tabernacle, and they do it in the temple, and they don't profane the temple because, again, they're serving God in the temple. And then he gives this statement in verse 6, which just is mind-boggling, folks. He says, yet I say to you that in this place there is one greater than the temple. Well, who is he referring to? Well, himself. But not as he's God and therefore he's greater, but he's a man filled with God, and he's the first one in the new covenant. And he now is proclaiming that we, the human beings, are the temple of the Holy Spirit. Now, if the Holy Spirit lives in me and I'm the temple, the habitat, that this isn't the temple, this is the temple, then everything I do in this temple is to be done to serve him. Which is pretty exclusive. Which means I don't come to this temple and serve God on the Sabbath day. I come to this temple and I serve God on Monday, on Tuesday, your job is a service to God. Woo! Your eating is a service to God. You do it well. Woo! Washing dishes is a service to God. This is getting, never mind. So, see, it changes the whole perspective of life. That it isn't just coming down and doing something on a particular day in a certain ceremony. That's not the deal, he says. The deal is the indwelling of the very person of God within you until the whole flow of your life is an offering to him. And you're in the very embrace and intimacy of his person as he serves through you. So everything he wants you to do is permissible. Then he comes to this third one, which is what we want to start on tonight. Verse 7. But if you have known what this means. Then he gives this quotation. I desire mercy and not sacrifice. Now that's a quotation out of Hosea chapter 6, verse 6. So he's quoting the Bible. If you have known what this means, I desire mercy and not sacrifice, you would not have condemned the guiltless. Now think about it. They've looked at the disciples and said, guilty. Jesus just called them guiltless. And he said, the reason you call them guilty when they're guiltless is because you don't know what this means. Well, what means? I desire mercy and not sacrifice. You don't know what that means. Therefore, you go around pronouncing judgment. Because you don't know what this means. I desire mercy and not sacrifice. The superior mercy. I want to give you the context of this. You understand, this didn't just show up. This just didn't pop into the mind of Jesus. He's been dealing with this verse and this subject from the very beginning. In fact, I want to propose to you that Matthew has been, in some sense, hounding this idea all the way through his gospel. And we're breaking this into three parts. I want you to look at what we're calling the state of the kingdom, where this first shows up. And it's back in chapter 5, verse 7 in the Beatitudes. Now, I know on Sunday morning we've been walking through the Beatitudes, and we've already done this Beatitude on Sunday morning. In fact, for about 5 Sundays. But some of you weren't there and don't come on Sunday morning. I understand that. So I want to walk you through this idea again. But right in the middle of the Beatitudes, he brings up the subject of mercy. Now understand, Jesus is just choosing his disciples. Okay, he's just got them chosen. And as he's chosen his disciples, he's going to give this phenomenal statement. We call it the manifesto of the kingdom of God. So he's literally laying out the principles of what the kingdom is all about and the structure of the kingdom itself. So basically what it is to be a Christian. So he's laying that out. Principle after principle after principle, concept after concept. He's laying it out for them. So this is a bold, dramatic statement. And it's 3 chapters long. And you think my sermons are long. It's 3 chapters long. It's phenomenal. He starts with the Beatitude. So at the very start of the proposition of the kingdom, he comes up with the idea of mercy. And here it is in verse 7. Blessed are the merciful, for they shall obtain mercy. Now you remember the word blessed is the Greek word makarios, which is the idea of congratulations. It's a whack on the back. It's a, woo, are you fortunate? Oh, you're just so fortunate. Woo, God has just rained his blessing all over you, son. I mean, woo, are you in a good spot? That's the meaning of the word. So Jesus has just come to this group of people and whacked them on the back and said, whoa, congratulations. And why is he congratulating, or who is he congratulating in verse 7? He's congratulating the merciful. Now, let me help you with this, and you'll remember some of this, but the word the word are is not there. Blessed are, that are, take are out of there. The is the word ho, it's the subject. Merciful is literally an adjective, and he does this in all the previous 4 Beatitudes. It's either an adjective or a participle, which doesn't make any difference because they're both the same. And they modify the word he. So, the. So you got this one or that one or the or whatever that is, however you want to translate that. And then it's modified. It's given content with the idea of mercy. So here's a person who is literally the content of his existence is mercy. The place where his life sits is mercy. He exists in the state of mercy. Now, what state is that? It's the state of the kingdom of God. He gave us that in the first Beatitude because he whacked us on the back and said, whoa, congratulations, you're absolutely helpless. Good for you. You're weak. Oh, good for you. You can't do anything, can you? Whoa, good for you. Where you're absolutely destitute. Whoa, good for you. You are so fortunate. Wow, you're just great. Congratulations. You absolutely have no strength at all. Good for you. You can't pull anything off. Good for you. Well, you're a big loser. Woo, good for you. Congratulations to you. And of course you say, good night. Why is he saying that about me? I am a loser because I've sinned. No, you're not a loser because you sin. The reason you're a loser, the reason you're helpless, the reason you can't pull anything off is because you were made that way. He created you to be that way. Well, why would God create me to be helpless? Oh, because he wants to take his unlimited resource of his person and embrace you. And in that embrace, you become the kingdom. You mean I'm the kingdom? Well, not exactly, because you're over here by yourself and you aren't the kingdom. Well, is God the kingdom? Well, not exactly. I suppose he can be anything he wants to be, but he's over here by himself and he's not the kingdom. But it's together. Jesus, that's who Jesus was. The first one. The first man filled with the Spirit of God, and the kingdom started. That's phenomenal. And it was in this embrace of somebody who's helpless with the unlimited resource of God, and in that embrace, that's what we want for you. Well, I can't. I know. I'm not able. I know. Well, I'm helpless. Congratulations. Admit it. Embrace it. In fact, that's the second beatitude. Mourning, which is just to continually admit I'm helpless and mourn and say, I admit this. I'm responding in my helplessness. I'm living in a response of helplessness. I'm always responding to that. Never get out of that. Always admit that in every situation. Don't ever take charge of anything. Don't do it. Just relax. I'm helpless. I can't. I'm not able. And in the admitting of that, continually respond to the resource of his presence and person that would move in and through you to accomplish all he wants to. And in that responsive mourning, you will experience the embrace of the Comforter, which you desperately need. Now he says when that takes place, of course, the nature of God begins to spill through you, which is a meekness, and you begin to relate to your physical world in a brand new way, and your whole physical world takes on meaning. Now, when that experience takes place, when you're living in that, do you know what happens? Oh, congratulations. You're in a place of meekness, or you're in a place of mercy. You're in a state, the state of the kingdom, which is a state of absolute mercy. Well, congratulations, you merciful ones. Now, if I'm in a state of mercy, and this mercy is really in the center of the kingdom, what is it that this mercy is all about? Define it for me. And we walked you through three ideas which are absolutely fundamental and a key to getting a hold of what mercy is all about. The first part of the definition, and you got to walk through this, and one builds on the other to grasp what mercy is and what's going on in your own life. The first one is the focus of mercy. The idea of mercy is it's always, always, always towards others. This is really important. It's never about you and towards you. It's always towards others. What I mean by that is you can't have mercy on yourself. Because the moment you turn and begin to have mercy on yourself, we don't call it mercy. We call it justification, justifying yourself, excusing yourself. We call it rationalization. So mercy is destroyed when it's focused on you. Well, you say, I've received mercy. Yeah, you received it from someone else, namely Jesus. And you are a recipient of mercy. Now, I am to take the mercy that I live in, and I'm to extend it to others, which means it's always what I've received is extended towards others, because if I focus it back, it destroys it. Now, mercy can never be then focused back on me, because again, that's excusing. So if you've got the idea that mercy is always extended and focused on someone other than myself. Now let's go to number 2. And I hate this one. Feeling of mercy. Mercy is a feeling. And I hate the idea of feeling, emotion, because that seems so undependable. Because they fluctuate. Oh, I got a headache, so I'm not merciful today. See, no, we're not talking about that kind of feeling. And yet, feeling somehow grabs a hold of the core of this thing. Because what we're saying, when you come to mercy, you're not dealing with a deed. Because the minute it becomes a deed, an obligation, a law, something you got to do, then it's moved into pride. and arrogance. See, if I'm merciful because, if I'm doing a deed of mercy because I'm superior, and it makes me feel superior, that's selfishness at the core, which can't possibly be what he's talking about. So it can't be motivated by self. It can't be motivated by pride. See, this has to be that the Spirit of God has literally gone to the depth of my heart, and he's literally brought his mind, oh, I want this for you, his mind and his inner being to you, and in and through you, you're beginning to feel like he feels. You're beginning to care like he cares. And mercy is spilling out of you. Why? Because you feel the way he feels. This isn't, well, I have to do this. This isn't obligation. This isn't duty. This is, oh, I see you, your need, and that brings up within me, the Spirit of God whelms up within me and gives me the compassion and the ability to have mercy on you. So if you say to me, well, I don't feel merciful towards people, I feel like stepping on them, then you need to examine whether you're filled with him or not. I think you ought to cut them off. Then I think you need to examine whether there's this flow of the Spirit of God within you that whelms up in this feeling, in this, it's hard to talk about because, again, feeling and emotion wavers. But this doesn't waver because this is the stability of the Spirit of God within you that brings a consistency of attitude and how you treat people. And it's mercy. And it's because of him. Now, that brings us then to the very foundation of the idea of mercy. First of all, it's focused on others. You always got to get that. If it's going to come from you, it's got to be focused on others, can't be focused on you. And it's an inner feeling, an awareness at the mind of Christ that's whelming up within you that causes you spontaneously to have this attitude towards others. Then the foundation is, well, if you go back into the Hebrew language, which Old Testament, and you grab a hold of the idea of mercy, it's a word that's just absolutely cannot be translated. Just cannot be translated. There isn't an English word that fits it. Sympathy may come as close. And you see that in the New Testament. The word sympathy in the New Testament is two words put together, and it's the idea of some with or together, and it's the idea of suffering with. In other words, sympathy, which is close to this meekness concept, or to this merciful concept, is the idea of, I see you in your need, and I so identify with you that I begin to feel your hurt. I crawl into your skin, and I begin to experience your situation and care about you. Well, good night. Who would be stupid enough to go that far? Jesus did. That's the whole dynamic of the New Testament. That God didn't sit on a throne and look through his binoculars at your life and say, wow, they look like they're hurting. He came off of his throne and got in your skin and felt, experienced, suffered, and wherever you are and whatever you're going through and whatever's happening in your life, I guarantee you, Jesus has been there. And he did not do this by remote control. This was not redemption from over there. He came and joined you in your plight. Isn't it interesting then the Apostle Paul comes along and says, oh, you know what we are? We're the body of Christ. Oh, and we're all members and all connected. And you know what that means? He gave words like this. And if one member suffers, all the members suffer with it. Wouldn't you like to be a part of a church like that? Or if one member is honored, all members rejoice with him. So mercy in its foundation core is the idea of crawling into the life of someone else and literally beginning to feel like they feel and hurt like they hurt. Praying Hyde was a phenomenal intercessor. You read his book and you just feel like you've never prayed in your life. God laid upon Praying Hyde's heart a burden. There was a whole nation that was in famine, and thousands of children and thousands of young people were just dying of starvation. And God laid upon his heart to pray for them, and so he did. But as he had been praying for several days, he suddenly realized that he could not pray for them and eat. So he quit eating. And when he was starving, like they were starving, he could pray. Whew. You ever prayed like that? What would you call that? Mercy. That's the whole idea of mercy. So I want you to get the picture. Jesus is starting. He's just chosen his disciples. He's starting his ministry. He stands before this crowd, and he talks about this relationship with God that is so phenomenal that in your helplessness, you embrace him and you become the kingdom. And as you live in that relationship, he begins to flow in you and embrace you, and you mourn and are comforted. In fact, his nature begins to spill through you, and you embrace your physical world in a whole new way. And you hunger and thirst after him and are filled. But it's not then the filling goes away and you hunger and thirst some more. But you hunger and thirst and are filled, and you stay filled, but the filling creates a whole new hunger. Woo! And then you hunger, and he fills you, and that filling doesn't go away, but it creates a whole new hunger, and you just keep, isn't that phenomenal? And in that relationship and state, you begin to live in mercy. When he got done preaching all of this, remember, chapter 7, verse 28. So it was when Jesus had ended these sayings that the people were astonished at his teaching. And you'll remember the word astonished there means knocked out of your senses. He blew them away. I wonder how many got it. Everybody that got it tonight, keep your hand down. Oh, it's unanimous. Well, let's see how many got it. That takes us to the second place. We're calling this the status of the kingdom. I want you to go to chapter 9. Now, here's how it plays out. Jesus has stood up before this crowd. He spilled out this great mercy thing, a whole Sermon on the Mount, and mercy just shows up all the time, identifying, pouring your life out, turning the other cheek. That whole concept is all over the Sermon on the Mount. When he gets done, he looks at his disciples and realizes, and this crowd, that he's knocked them out of their senses, and they didn't even come close to understanding what he was saying. So he says, hey guys, I'm going to take this to the streets. Now, I know you've wanted to do this with preachers. You've wanted to reach out and grab a hold of them by the nape of the neck and just throw them out into your world and say, go down to my job and live that fancy sermon you just preached. Come and live with my wife and live that sermon. You've wanted to do that. I know you have. Because we stand up here and we mouth off and say great things, and you say, oh, yeah. But what's said here isn't worth a dime if it isn't out there. Come on. Isn't worth a dime if it isn't out there. So Jesus has just got done preaching this sermon, and the whole crowd, if I'd have been there, I'd have been the same way. The whole crowd said, I'd like to take you by the nape of the neck, Jesus, and throw you out here in my world, and you take the great Sermon on the Mount, turn the other cheek. Be glad when you're persecuted. Yeah, sure. And live it in my day in and day out world where people are stepping on you. And so Jesus said, hey, let's take it to the streets. And chapters 8 and 9 are the street living of the Sermon on the Mount. He's taking the Sermon on the Mount, and Matthew's handpicked these situations, and we're going to see the Sermon on the Mount just literally played out. And you can take every one of these miracles he's done in chapter 8 and 9, and it literally plays the Sermon on the Mount. It literally plays it out in real life. For instance, very first one, he embraces a leper. Oh, brother, take no thought for your life. Oh, what? The second illustration is a centurion. A centurion, yeah, Roman barbarian, I know. Person of another race, absolutely. Aren't you prejudiced? Wow, haven't they come and conquered your country? Yeah. Aren't they dominating you? Yeah. Doesn't he walk into your store and take what he wants and not pay for it? Yeah. Don't they abuse your women? Yeah. Why don't you hate him? I do hate him. Hey, what are you doing, Jesus? You're healing the guy's servant. What's wrong with you? Oh, Sermon on the Mount. Played out. Now, the one I want you to look at is in chapter 9, verse 9. Jesus is walking down the street. It's odd how everybody stays away from that side of the street. They're all walking over here on this side of the street. In fact, if you watch closely, you'll see that they come down the block, cross the street, come over, cross, and go back up. And they bypass that certain section. What's the problem? Matthew sits there. Well, what's his problem? There is no way to describe the lowness of the man. He is filth, garbage. He's worse than roadkill. He's Matthew, the tax collector. In fact, they had this phrase, tax collectors and sinners. In other words, it was a special category. It isn't just sinners, it's tax collectors and sinners. Do you realize what it took to be a tax collector? Oh, you had to bribe, you had to work, you had to connive, you had to slip under the table stuff, you had to pull strings, and finally, if you had enough and worked your way into it, you got this position. Oh, it was really a good position. Oh, you got this position of being a tax collector, and I mean the money began to roll in. Because you could charge taxes for whatever you wanted to. Yeah, Rome got their cut. Anything you charged above that was yours. And your own people, Matthew being a Jew, your own people hate you. Why? You're a cheat. You're taking advantage of them. You're ostracized. You're alone. You're an outcast. See, you're not just a sinner. You're a tax collector. If this guy is on fire, you don't bother spitting on him. Because he's not worth your spit. A tax collector. What? Jesus is going over there. What? What's he going to do? Probably going to give him a tongue lashing. I bet he's going to talk to him about hell. That'd be a good time to do it, wouldn't it? Look the old boy right in the eye, put your finger right on his nose and said, you are going to hell. You are a cheat. You are a thief. You're a no good. You're worse than you're going to hell. You know what Jesus does? Follow me. Join me. Nobody wants me. Join me. I'm worse than a leper. Join me. I don't even qualify as a sinner. I'm below that. Join me. If I'm going to have a congregation, I want some decent people. I mean, mercy. All this tax collectors? Brother, join me. And here's what's so phenomenal. The guy does. Can you imagine him just, after all he's gone through to get here, he sets all that aside and just gone and follows Jesus. Well, it'll never amount to anything. Yeah, I know. Probably just write a book and people read it for the next 2,000 years. But never amount to anything. See, would you see that in him? No. Tax collector. Mercy. Tax collector. Now, so Jesus goes to this house. And Matthew, where'd he go? Oh, you know what he did? He ran all over town inviting his friends to come. Well, what kind of friends does he have? Tax collector friends. Can you imagine a whole house full of... The stench must have been terrible. The aroma of, can you imagine how they must have been dressed? Can you imagine the kind of words they must have used? Can you imagine the activities they must have had? Can the language this is terrible. And Matthew invites them all in, and they all got into this house, and they had a tax collector sinners party. And Jesus was there in the middle of it. Oh, the Pharisees are looking in the window. Oh, what's he doing now? Oh, Jesus is laughing at their jokes. Oh. Can you see them? They couldn't get to Jesus, so they asked his disciples. Verse 11. Why does your teacher eat with tax collectors and sinners? Could have gone to McDonald's with us. Why? Why does he do that? Now, Jesus is going to give them a reason why he does that. And the heart of the reason is in verse 13. I desire mercy and not sacrifice. Sermon on the Mount played out. What does the Sermon on the Mount look like? Eating with tax collectors and sinners. Why? Because you live in this. And when you're absolutely helpless and you live in the unlimited resource and His nature begins to spill through you and you live in this state of mercy, and mercy can only now be extended through you to others, and if it's turned to you, it turns into rationalization and pride and arrogance. So obviously you're going to pour this mercy out. It's the mercy of God to others. Tax collectors and sinners. And he quotes this same verse that's in our passage. Isn't that hilarious? Absolutely hilarious. Now, there's several things I wanted to give you, and I don't know if we're going to have time to walk through this or not, but just let me hurriedly give you a couple of them. One is that in this whole situation of chapter 9, this Matthew situation, and this quote, he precedes that with those who are well have no need of a physician, but those who are sick. But go and learn what this means. I desire mercy and not sacrifice. That one thing that's absolutely crucial in the whole statement is that it's people, not categories. It's people, not categories. Now, if you're without mercy, I can guarantee you what you do. The reason I know this is because I've done this. You put people in categories. See, they cease to be people and they become categories. And our world is full of that. Jesus never did that. See, well, why didn't Jesus invite the other tax collectors? His was Matthew's the only one. Because Matthew wasn't in a category called tax collectors. He was a people. See, that really matters. And I'm struggling with this. Because, I want the mind of Christ, and I don't want to do this. But see, I don't know how to explain this to you. For instance, somebody steals something. They're a thief! Category. They're a thief! What does that mean? How do you treat thieves? Oh, I can tell you how you treat thieves. You don't trust them, number one. You stay away from them, number two. You never do dealings with them, number three. And you ostracize them, number four. Why? They're thieves. So I got this category of thieves. They cease to be people and they become thieves. Wait a minute. He's only 5 and he just took a stick of gum. He's a thief. There's no exceptions. If you're a thief, you're a thief. Well, you say you wouldn't do that to a 5-year-old. Well, that's probably true. You would make an exception for him and say, hey, we need to love on him and teach him. Well, maybe I'm 35 and do that. Maybe you need to love. How do you know if I'm in a category? Unless you embrace me. Unless you break down the walls and come to me. How do you know what my situation is? How do you know whether my family is starving? How do you know why? How do you know what motivates me? Do you ever get next to me enough to know? No, just put me in a category. Oh. See, Jesus never did that. Oh. You know how grateful I am for that? Because there's lots of categories I could have been put in. Oh. And I was a good guy. So I can imagine the categories you guys could have been put in. Oh, think of that. And he broke down all the walls. And when he saw Matthew, he didn't see tax collector. Ooh. He saw Matthew, a writer of the New Testament. Matthew, a disciple. Matthew, who was going to go out and cast out demons. He saw Matthew, people. How are you going to do that? You've only got one chance in the world to do that. Oh, I'm helpless. Unlimited resource of the person. And in that embrace, I become a kingdom person who lives in the state of mercy. And because I live in the state of mercy, I don't see categories. I see people. Let me give you another one. Programs, not calling. See, the minute you don't have mercy, what you do is you have this category that you put people in, and they're no longer people, they're in this category, and then you develop a program of how to treat that category. It's exactly what the Pharisees did. See, tax collector. Now, Matthew isn't a person anymore. He's in the category of tax collector. How do you treat tax collectors? Walk on the other side of the street. Despise them. Stay away from them. Never befriend them. And don't go to their parties. And you develop a program of how to treat them. That's interesting, isn't it? Trying not to get off on one of my pet peeves. I'm on the phone. I'm trying to get something done, and they keep saying, well, you can't do that unless you have this paper. You've got to have this certain paper. And I'm saying, well, listen, I've got this and this and this, which all came from that paper. Isn't that enough? No, you've got to have that paper. See, there's a program. They have laws. We don't bend on this. This is the way it is. You know how irritating that is? And you try to talk to them if they have no understanding at all. You know why? Because they're a computer. Yeah, you're not talking to a person, you're talking to a computer. And a computer has no mercy. And it doesn't matter how much you explain to the computer, they're not going to, no, got to have this, you got to, because computers have programs. And you're not a person. And I keep saying, I want to talk to a person. I want somebody who can cry with me. I want somebody who has some understanding. I want somebody who says, listen, I'll work with you. I'll help you. Now, you have experienced that. And yet, folks, do you know how easy it is? I put people in this, and I'm a computer, brother. I have no understanding for them at all. Well, that's just the way I am. In the embrace. Could Jesus uncomputerize my computer? Oh, let me give you another. Prejudice, not concern. Interesting. They caught this woman in the act of adultery. Can you see them? Which may mean they were participating in it. I don't know. But anyhow, they caught her. They grabbed a hold of her by the hair and drug her to Jesus. We got a program. Here she is in this category. What's her name? We don't know and don't care. Here she is in this category. We brought her to the feet of Jesus. Our program says, stone her to death. I know it doesn't say so in the scriptures, but I'm sure Jesus found out what her name was. And there isn't any question he had a conversation with her when they were all gone. Because he got done with them, he had eliminated their program. Because he didn't have a program. She's taken in adultery. I know. She participates. I know. She's not. I know. Do you want her babysitting your kids? I know. I know. Mercy. Mercy. But I can't help the way I feel. That's the whole point, folks. I have this prejudice, and it's the way I feel about people who do. How can I? It takes a divine, I want the mind of Christ. I got to live, I got to feel, I want him to infiltrate, I want him to cleanse, I want him to take me into, in fact, look at this passage, verse 13. This is really key and we're going to close. Go and learn. The Greek word for learn there is monthano. It is a synonym for gnosko, which is know. Keep that in mind. So he says to them, now get the pattern here. Sermon on the Mount lays this whole mercy thing out. Nobody got it. So, hey, we hit the streets. In chapters 8 and 9, we're living out the Sermon on the Mount. One of the things that comes up is this mercy thing with the tax collector. So Jesus says, you didn't get the Sermon on the Mount. I tried to tell you then. Now, here's what I want you to do. I want you to go and learn this. And he spells it out. And he gives them this scripture out of Hosea chapter 6, verse 6. I desire mercy and not sacrifice. Now go learn what that means. So work on this, guys. Pray about it and work on this. Okay. Now they're gone. Now come to our passage. Chapter 12, verse 6. Here's the same group. Same group. Well, prove that. Probably can't. But it sure sounds good. Pharisees. There they are. He had just given the Sermon on the Mount. They didn't get that. He just had a personal conversation with them and said, go and learn this. I desire mercy and not sacrifice. Now they're back. All been out of shape about Sabbath day. One of the examples he gives, look at verse 7. If you had known, now remember, go and learn, synonym for known. He says, you didn't go and learn, did you? You still didn't get it, did you? And they said the third time's a charm. And you still didn't get it. And here we are, the third time. And you still don't know what it means. I desire mercy and not sacrifice. You missed it again. Jesus, I know it's been 3 times, 4 times, 5 times. You say it again, and you say it again. When am I going to get it, Jesus? When am I going to come in my total, absolute helplessness? And when am I going to embrace you in your overwhelming strength? When am I going to become the temple of the Spirit of God that would spill your attitude and your life through me? When will I have your mind, and when will I think like you? When will I be gripped by what grips you? When will I be able to see the Matthews of the world like you see them? When will the walls come down for me? When will what you did leap off your throne and take on flesh and enter into my hurts? When will I leap off of the throne of my own self-existence and self-centeredness and literally get into the skin of those who so desperately need mercy? My judgmental attitude tells me I haven't got this yet. My initial tendency to put them in a category. Teach me the ministry of the Spirit of God. Heads are bowed. You have the mind of Christ. You feel like He feels. You walk on the other side of the street. The wonder of forgiveness. The way He showered Himself on you. The mercy that's been extended in your life until you live in a state of mercy. Have you learned? Have you known? I desire mercy and not sacrifice. Oh God, we cry out to you tonight that you would make us a church of merciful people. Who will link with your bleeding and your suffering and will be an extension of your blood process to our world. We face a whole community, God, who desperately needs mercy. And Lord, I don't know that we can go and face the community until we can look at each other and have mercy on each other. Break down our walls. Break down our prejudices. Destroy our programs. Oh God, save me from being like the Pharisees. And give me the mind of Christ, that not only knows, but is embraced by and spills forth with the mercy of God. Want to join me in seeking? Would you?